All right, everybody. I'm going to introduce our next speaker. This is Whalen. He's an information security engineer in the healthcare industry. He's also founder of the InfoSec Speakeasy. He specializes in network intelligence and malware analysis. He was previously worked as an intelligence analyst in the defense industry with me. In his spare time, Sean makes cutting-edge open-source InfoSec software easier to adopt through code and documentation contributions. And he's also a sci-fi fanatic and slightly paranoid, like most of us. Sean Whalen.
Thank you. So today my talk is on practical defense, which is basically just taking the tools that you probably already have in your environment and making sure that you're utilizing them to the fullest potential and in the right places and at the right times in order to get them the maximum benefit from those controls without necessarily having to go out and purchase new tools or completely reinvent the wheel or tear up your infrastructure. So just my standard disclaimer, the opinions and views in this talk are my own and not those of my past, present, or post-apocalyptic employers. So I'm sure most people in this room are aware of how incident response typically works. You know, it's like, oh crap, we got this IDS alert. We should probably block that domain. Okay, you got a hash? Okay, we'll put that in our AV system, and we'll submit this to our threat feed along with the 5,000 other hashes, and we're good. Until they go and just repack it or just stand up a new domain or a new IP. So what you got to think about is the attacker to change the indicators that you're using. It takes them like 30 seconds. It takes an organization, depending on whether you've got automation or APIs, and a lot of organizations don't, they may have to call out to another team to put in a block or to do something. So depending on the organization, it could take, let's say, 20, 30 minutes to put in a block for an individual indicator, depending on the control, whereas the attacker has like 30 seconds, they can spit out as many domains or hashes as they want. They can write small scripts to do that with very little effort. So not surprisingly, there's been a whole market, especially over the past few years, there's been an explosion of security startups with tons of venture capital funding that claims to solve a lot of these issues that everyone in this room sees from day to day. So you see a lot of sales pitches and a lot of promises and a lot of our tool can do all kinds of things and things like, you know, next gen AV, and in some sales presentations certain vendors will do things like install McAfee, but then won't allow it to update and just have this ancient version of McAfee and goes, look at what all the stuff that we catch that they don't. It's like, yeah, I saw what you did. Just stuff that's, when you're dealing with a very new company, with a new startup that's got a new product that's flashy, that's got this great marketing, most of these new startups, if you're an early adopter, you become their QA team. So, you know, you're essentially testing out their product for them and paying them tons of money for the privilege of doing so. I mean, you know, so many of these new products and services that come out, it seems like there's a new one every week. When I've gotten quotes on them before, I'm like, are you kidding me? For that kind of money, if they're talking, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year or something like that, or, you know, there have been certain vendors that's been up to literally $1 million a year. And it's like, for that kind of money, just give me the head count for developers and I'll build exactly what I want and it'll be exactly what I want and how I expect it to work. So are you kidding me? Like, you know, most organizations don't have that kind of money to spend on an unknown and untested a new product. Because this is what our budgets are like. So, when you're thinking about what controls to put in place and when and why, it's often really important to go back and think about attacker motivations, which may seem pretty basic for most people in this room, but there are some people who are new to the industry. Whereas most of your attackers, highly opportunistic, they're only interested in making a quick buck, or they're interested in taking arbitrary infrastructure, whatever they can find their way into and exploit. Your ancient version of WordPress is a favorite example, and use that to host malware because you've got an existing domain that has a good history that is going to get past web filters, at least for their initial wave of attacks. Or they're just interested in wreaking havoc, doing a DDoS, or you happen to be Sony Pictures. And then at the very top, in the rarest of cases, they're interested in you specifically because of something that you have that they want. So maybe you're a defense company, maybe you're a government, maybe you're just a competitor with some super secret sauce that they want to get a hold of. But the vast majority of attacks are just interested in making as much money with as little effort as possible. So, to that end, if you're starting out and you're thinking about where should I be putting controls, you should be thinking about what controls can I put in place that will stop the vast majority of attacks that are out there. Because if you make it more difficult for the attacker, they're just going to move on to something else. If their script doesn't work or their predefined favorite vulnerabilities don't work, they're just going to move on to the next random IP space they can find. And there's a lot of effort that's focused on APT and threat hunting and finding that super secret malware that's been hiding in your system for ages. But if you can't properly defend against opportunistic attacks, and you're spending your time chasing down, pony infections, for example, or even just the adware crap that people install because somebody thought it would be a great idea to put a free coupon printer on their work asset. If those are the kinds of alerts that you're chasing down all the time, you're not going to have the bandwidth to do threat hunting and do APT and all this stuff that tends to get a lot of the focus in marketing and media attention. So basically, your goal is to make your attacker say this. And of course, the one exception to that is legitimate APT groups who are interested in you because you are you, because they have something you want, or that they want, or you have access to another entity that maybe you're the weaker link there than their final target. So those folks are not going to give up easily. So it's even more important to spend your time, money, and other resources prudently. To give a non-cybersecurity analogy, cameras, seismic sensors, and AI to detect those things would work a lot better than a 30-foot border wall, because the very first thing that people are going to do is tunnel underneath them. And APT works almost the exact same way. You got this really nice, expensive next-gen firewall, but they're just going to find ways to pivot out over DNS or something like that. So focus on what makes the most sense versus what's flashy, because then you could find yourself, if you focus on what's flashy, what's new, what's expensive, you could end up in a situation like this. Yes, that is a real headline. Some U.S. ally used a multi-million-dollar Patriot missile to shoot down a frickin' drone. And that's because terrorist organizations have turned to using drones as kind of not only flying surveillance, but aerial bombs. But, okay, if I'm a terrorist or whoever, or somebody who's using that kind of delivery mechanism, if I'm thinking, oh, I can make these guys waste millions of dollars in their resources, and all I have to spend is a couple $100 per drone, maybe even less than that if I get the cheap stuff. Awesome, you know? So there's a monetary value to being prudent that I think your management can really understand when you're trying to pitch certain controls versus the new shiny, because sometimes new shiny is easier to pitch to management because it's got that nice glossy marketing material, but being able to pitch cost savings by tuning existing controls and doing that stuff, it can also speak to management well through cost savings. I'm going to get to how you can do that later in this talk. So I already touched on this a little bit, but TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures, how attackers do what they do, what their process is, how they go about their recon, what kind of rats do they like to use, or do they leverage PowerShell, are much, much more important. What organizations do they go after and why are much, 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 much more important than individual hashes and these atomic indicators that are extremely ephemeral, that can change every 30 seconds, and you're getting this in a threat feed from maybe your ISAC or something with almost zero context that basically just says, this is bad because I said it is. And sometimes you don't even know who said it was bad. And you're like, okay, great, what do I do with this alert now? Whereas if I know, for example, that an attacker likes to leverage PowerShell, I might start making sure that I turn on PowerShell logging, that I have an endpoint recording application, or that I leverage the PowerShell restricted mode that prevents PowerShell from being used in things like code injections and stuff like that. So that is a lot more effective than just trying to block the individual domains or the individual email addresses that's maybe sending those things that eventually trigger PowerShell, or taking those one-off things that will maybe dump a word macro and then execute PowerShell. So thinking about the cyber kill chain and thinking about how attackers do what they do and the process they do what they do, and putting in blocks at every single layer that you can within reason is a lot more effective than chasing down those onesie-twosies. So I already touched on this. Aren't you using your controls to their fullest potential? You might not need as much new shiny as you think. And so let's think about the ways that attackers do what they do, especially today, more recently. Credential harvesting is one of the most popular ways for both pen testers and your average attacker to get into a business, because it's so easy to do. You just stand up a fake web form, ask people to fill in creds, and people give you creds. And this happens all over the place, from general spammers collecting creds to spam out, to use your email gateways to spam out to other organizations, rather repeat in a recursive fashion. Or it can be used for more APT-style attacks, like what happened with the Democratic National Committee during the last election. And what's crazy about this is it doesn't even need to be particularly sophisticated. That screenshot that I have up there that looks like it was designed in front page is an actual fish that was hosted on one of the free hosting services, like Wix, Jimdo. Believe it or not, Tripod's still around. And what these attackers will often do is purposely misspell a word, like there it's password, so it's great for International Talk Like a Pirate Day for your fish test. They'll purposely misspell the word password or username because they know that these free hosting services are looking for phishing forms but most of your users aren't going to notice that typo if they're going to fill in this form, and then they've just got your credits emailed to them. If you've got single factor off, they can now get into your webmail or your VPN or whatever else you have accessible on your perimeter, and they've expended almost no effort. They haven't even bothered scraping your webmail form to make a clone of it. They can just do something like this in 2 minutes and get almost, if not better, results. I've actually talked with some security awareness folks, and there's almost a joke on that side of our industry, which is the crappier the form looks, the more likely it is to be successful. I'm kidding, but I'm not. It's, you go through more detail to make this highly sophisticated, official-looking thing, and for whatever reason, people are more suspicious of that than things like this. So, different controls that pretty much everybody could and should be doing with their existing email gateways and other email security infrastructure is the easiest one to implement as far as not impacting mail flow so much and not potentially disrupting business, which is what the business and your email admins are always concerned about, is tagging external email. So just having a feature where it will change the body and just say, hey, just so you know, this is an external email, didn't come from our servers, be careful with this. So that way if someone, if you don't have SPF enabled yet, for example, and people can still spoof your CEO and things like that, they're going to at least get the heads up where, hey, this didn't come from us, you should treat this as suspicious, and maybe even include an email address where people can send phishing, although oftentimes in that, for every one person who sends you a legitimate phish, and it's awesome, and that's some of the best detection you can get as your own employees. For every one person that sends you a good phish, you'll get 5 more people who send you spam and the company's internal newsletter into your phishing mailbox. But it is still really important to have good user awareness and different things like that. So once you've kind of progressed from that, having an external email tagging, and people are more comfortable with the changes that you're making to email, maybe then you advance to more things like adding SPF and DKIM and things that can prevent email spoofing. That can be a little difficult, especially in large organizations that use SaaS providers that legitimately spoof. So that kind of involves you'll have to put SPF in monitor mode. That's why it exists. So put SPF and DKIM in monitor mode and kind of see what's spoofing in your environment, because chances are if it's legitimate, it's going to happen pretty regularly. And then you can just work with those providers and adjust your SPF and DKIM accordingly, so that way when you do flip the switch from a soft fail to a hard fail, you have confidence and you can inform your leadership that this is not going to impact business because we tested this. And one of the other really simple things you can do is Microsoft publishes a list, which I've linked here, and I've already put all my slides on SlideShare, so if you just Google my name of this talk or my name, it should come up. Microsoft already posts a link of all the high-risk file extensions that you basically should not allow. They don't say that this is specifically what it's for, they just call them high-risk attachment types. But these are things that you should not allow in your email environment. There is no legitimate business reason that somebody should be receiving a .str screensaver file in their email, so why the heck are you processing it through your gateway at all? You know, that just reduces load on your gateway too. So you're not even virus scanning and stuff as much, you're just dropping that right out of the gate. So those are the main email controls. And that image, I just Googled secure mailbox, and I had no idea such a thing existed. But to me, that looks like it would just make some neighborhood kids say challenge accepted. But moving on from email to your firewalls and your perimeter, again, picking on next generation firewalls a little bit here. Those are great for identifying things like, you know, is what's coming out of port 443, really HTTPS. But if you've got this fancy next generation firewall and you allow traffic out of any arbitrary port, or you have any arbitrary connection, SSH tunneling, things like that, having a fancy web proxy isn't going to do you much good. Basic InfoSec practice, but a lot of organizations don't follow it, where the only things that should be able to talk out from your network are the services that you host on the DMZ that are legit services people access. So your websites, your email gateways, and then of course your browsing proxies going out. Those should be the only things that should be able to communicate from your network and on those specific ports with the matching protocols, because next generation firewalls can do that. Otherwise, your next generation firewall isn't providing you with real security. It's more of a security theater. An analogy that I came up with is, can you imagine if an automobile manufacturer came up in court and said, well, airbags were installed, they were just only configured to deploy in the event of a head-on collision. How well that would go over in court. That's the same thing where if it would have been on our blacklist, we would have blocked it, or if our proxy would have considered it suspicious, we would have blocked it, or if they didn't go off to some arbitrary port or do an SSH tunnel, we would have blocked it. If you have the capability and it's not going to impact business, which it really shouldn't, use it. And then also, make sure you're using multi-factor authentication, because like I said earlier, it's just way too easy to collect credentials, and then they have access to everything that you grant your users access to on the perimeter, whether that's webmail or something else. And you might think big deal, or your management might think big deal if as long as they don't have access to particularly sensitive information. Who cares? Well, even if the attacker isn't interested in spamming you, isn't interested in spying on you, even if they're just using your gateways as just a scripted spam engine, they don't even care who they pwned or why. That looks bad for your business, because you're sending spam or phishing email out, and that's coming from your domain. So even if they're not targeting your customers directly, if you've got a large enough customer base, there's a chance that one of your customers might see, oh crap, Acme Co. has been pwned. And that just doesn't look good, not only from just a PR perspective, it's definitely not good from an InfoSec perspective, but that's just another thing that you can raise with your management if you need to have that conversation as to why you're making these suggestions of doing the things you're doing. Because I know in my job as a defender, if I see like a university or a hospital or a school or some other organization that's really large and has single-factor webmail and is a prime target for these kinds of spammers, I'll just send out a quick FYI to whoever their abuse email is, or I'll track down the abuse for that IP address of the mail server or something. Just say, hey, FYI, are you aware that this email account's been compromised? You probably need to change those credentials. And that's just my way of trying to just help out. But maybe for a K-12 school, it's not a big deal. If you're a Fortune 500, that's a really big deal if that happens to be one of your clients. So then AV's not dead. I already touched on that next generation AV a little bit, but with most of your major AV vendors, they've got features that are actually pretty nice and do a pretty good job. Of course, AV is not going to catch everything, but again, you make the most of what you have, and your AV is not really meant to catch the super crafty APT style spear phishing. If it's already to the point where they're trying to execute code on your asset, I think you've got bigger problems. but they're also really good at detecting that commodity malware. They can stop adware a lot of times if you actually turn that on. A lot of times it's turned off by default for some inexplicable reason. But that can, if you turn those kinds of heuristics and protections on and prevent people from getting that crap adware in the first place, not only is that going to make your employees' lives easier, the business more efficient because people are dealing with ad pop-ups all the time, that's going to decrease your noise so you can focus on more serious alerts. And from a business perspective, it's also going to decrease the number of reimages that you need because somebody got pony on their system or they've just got umpteen million adware things and it's like, oh God, just kill it with fire. So that having that reduced reimage can also reduce business costs as well. And some other controls that that you may or may not be aware of is the Center for Internet Security takes different security benchmark standards, like what NIST comes up with and like what NIST comes up with their STIGs, and then kind of turns them into more of a general security benchmark and baseline for people to use. The baselines themselves are free, and you can get the PDFs right on their website. I linked directly to it. They do charge for a tool that will scan those and will kind of validate that your systems match these standards. But as far as all the information that you need to be able to build and deploy GPOs or your images, that's all in the PDF, and that's free to use. Reducing admin rights is another one that's kind of obvious but can be a little difficult in practice because there's so many legacy applications that just assume that people are local admins, that this application is going to run as a local admin. And at least one product that I'm aware of that helps manage it, there are probably some others, is Vector Defend Point, which you can set policies and say these particular users are allowed to execute these applications, and when they do so, these applications are going to have elevated privileges, but the users themselves do not. So only these specific legacy applications have administrative rights, so that way if malware does get on the system or they're installing crap, at least it's theoretically only going to affect their user profile instead of allowing someone to start stealing session tokens and then pivoting else on your network and wreaking havoc. EDR, having your endpoint data recording in place is absolutely critical. It's really, really nice just to be able to have that repository where all of your agents are sending logs to, and I can just query instead of having to do a sweep and hope to God that the endpoint that I'm looking for is online. I can do a sweep with like a Splunk query or something like that and figure out whether this particular application is installed, whether this particular indicator exists, and then of course I can get alerts when these systems detect something funny like a PowerShell base64 command runs and things like that that your traditional AV might not pick up on. I can get alerts through that way. And Carbon Black is probably one of the most well-known ones. Been around for possibly the longest. CrowdStrike is something I'm pretty familiar with. I like the amount of data that it collects and the fact that it's got a Splunk-based portal in the cloud. So if you're familiar with Splunk from doing your SIM work or your little log querying, those skills translate over very easily. And then if you'd rather go for something open source, either for security or cost reasons or something like that, there's a really cool project out called Lima Charlie that can give you a lot of those same endpoint details. I don't think it does the same levels of detection of suspicious behavior, although I could be wrong about that. They're adding new features to it all the time. But at least gives you that recording capability at pretty low cost. You're just standing up the infrastructure somewhere in the cloud or in your data center. So moving from the technical side to the more human side, political side, business side of things. I often think that in a lot of businesses and a lot of organizations, this is what people think we do. You know, it's like that is an old Bridgestone Super Bowl commercial to give proper credit, but you know, it's half the time when we're chasing down alerts and we're kind of smacking people on the wrist, it's almost like we're going around going, you get a reimage, and you get a reimage, and you get a reimage, everybody gets a reimage, and you know, that's highly disruptive to people's work. And they're, oh crap, it's the security guy. What did I do wrong this time? Or, you know, the business has got this great new idea. You know, we're just going to throw everything up in AWS and it's super secure out of the box, right? It's the cloud. And it's like, whoa, slow down there a bit. You know, we in certain organizations, and sometimes not undeservedly, we get this reputation of the people who say no or the people who take your computer from you and end up just ruining your day or your week. Moving on from there, you really need to build your support as information security professionals with the rest of your IT organization. You need to build those bridges, build that understanding, and kind of communicate that when security works well, it should make their jobs easier. You need to test the hell out of things before you go deploying them, because that can tarnish IT's reputation in general, but your teams and then IT's more resistant to different requests that you have in the future, and understandably, because you know, as security professionals, we're not the ones getting directly yelled at by your end users, by whether it be a random employee or some VP or above or something. They're going to be calling the help desk and then their management and saying, what the hell, and then the help desk finds out that it's this new security control that you put in place, and that's just going to put a rift between you and the IT department, where you need to have a really good understanding, your kind of pulse on what they're doing and what their plans are and how the deployment is planned from the get-go, so that way instead of saying, no, or oh my God, why did you do that? You can say, okay, well, I hear you want to do this, or you want to migrate to Office 365. Well, since we're doing that anyway, can we make sure that when we do that, that the multi-factor authentication that comes with that is turned on? I mean, that's a win-win because IT is getting their reduced infrastructure with Office 365, and you're getting improved security because now if somebody does that credential phishing with password, you're not they're not logging into your webmail anymore, and that reduces the amount of emergency password resets that you have to do, which in turn reduces the amount of help desk calls of people. Why can't I get into my account? Oh, it's because security reset your credentials. Well, why'd they do that? Oh, I don't know why they would have done that. And so it really helps out everybody across the business when security works well. But you've got to communicate that message and kind of build those bridges and those relationships with people across both IT and the business side of things in a way that makes sense for everybody. And a key part of that, of course, is documenting everything. When a breach or suspected breach occurs, these are the questions that management's going to ask you, and almost in the order they're going to ask you. They're going to, very first thing, say, what did we lose, if anything? How did it happen? Could we have prevented it? What do we do to prevent this in the future? how should we communicate this, and all that stuff. So it really is a good practice to just get in the practice of documenting as much as possible, because that can help you figure out, okay, here's what controls that have been put in place to prevent this, or even if something did get prevented, you're like, whew, that was a close one, we only missed this because we have, one of our solutions happened to have a signature for this particular variant, but we should have stopped them further up the kill chain here. Make note of that, and that gives you good ammunition for why you want to make these adjustments to your controls in the first place, because you have historical data of actual events. Even if they were blocked by something else, you can say, well, that was only blocked because in this very specific instance, X happened, which will probably not happen again. So we need to also implement this other control, which can help you prevent whole classes of attacks, like email spoofing, credential harvesting, and stuff like that. So going after the things that can affect entire classes of attacks versus just one particular threat actor's infrastructure or something like that. So, any questions?